Hello friends, and welcome to studio vlog number 1. This is my first time doing anything ever with polymer clay, but it was really fun and I learned a lot. So if you like learning from other people's mistakes, continue watching because I made a lot of them. A whole lot. So attempt number 1, I used 1 block of Sculpey Premo in the white translucent color. I got it for $3, I believe, at my local Michael's, but you can find it at Hobby Lobby, Joann's, and even your local arts and crafts store. It's a very crumbly, hard type of clay. Lesson number 1, I really should have took some time to condition this clay because it was so crumbly, so brittle, and it was just not good. But anyways, here's where I take my tissue blade or my clay blade and I just cut it up into little pieces. Lesson number 2, way too many pieces. You don't need to cut it up into this many little pieces. It's not gonna show off the marbling very well, and I learned that later on. So next, I got these cheap little paint brushes. I don't remember where I got them from, probably Michael's, but maybe somewhere else. The brand or the type of paint brushes doesn't really matter other than they work with acrylic paint, because that's the type of paint I mostly use because it is cheap. Speaking of cheap paint, I use the Craft Smart Michael's brand of acrylic paint. I got these really pretty colors for like 80 cents each. So I'm just gonna squirt a little bit of each color. I really like yellow and orange. I think it's really pretty. So then I take my cheap little paintbrush and I spread it around. I try not to use too much paint because then your clay will take forever to dry and you don't want that. That is bad. I'm just going to continue to brush on the thin layer of paint on the outside of the clay. I do the orange and then I wash off my brush, dry it, and then I go back and do the yellow. So it was getting pretty late at this point, so I just let it dry overnight. Then I take this liquid Sculpey. I think I got it from Michael's as well. And I just jumble up and combine all the little crumbs of polymer clay I have here and then just give it a squeeze. I like to add a generous amount of the liquid polymer clay just so I know the crumbs of clay are going to be very well combined. I don't want anything to fall out of my clump of clay. So now I do my best to try to squeeze all the clay together. Again, the clay is very hard and crumbly, and this liquid polymer clay stuff is so sticky and it's starting to like sort of dissolve the acrylic paint. It is very unpleasant to the touch. I don't like touching it. I wish I used gloves. That's lesson number 3. Use gloves because this feels kind of gross. It's just like very sticky. But you know, I'm really tough, so I just power through it and I make this lumpy looking cube. I guess it's a cube. I call it a cube. And my hands are still very sticky. So then I'm gonna go ahead and cut this into slabs, I guess it's called. They look pretty cool, but it's still very crumbly because I neglected to condition the clay. But see, looks pretty cool. I like how it looks, both front and back. So during this very first attempt, I didn't know how to get them to stick together. So, I think I just tore that one a little bit. So I just tried to press it down and eventually I just tried to smush it together as best I could. Yeah, but it doesn't really work like that. So I fold over the parchment paper. Oh yeah, by the way, I had parchment paper underneath this clay the whole time. It's very cheap and it keeps the stickiness from off your table. So I'm trying to use this rolling pin to make the clay slabs thinner and like more cohesive, but it's not working. So I used this pasta maker I got off Amazon for like 20 bucks, but it totally shreds up. Like you can see at the bottom and at the top, it totally ate up because it wasn't conditioned. So I just try to continue rolling it out really hard, but nothing ever happens because it's like a very hard clay. But at least the design looks cool though. So yeah, I just gave up trying to roll this out any thinner because it wasn't happening. It just wasn't gonna happen. So I just slapped that baby on a little ceramic tile that I got for like $1 at Home Depot, and look, Now it's time to bust out the clay cutters. I got these off Amazon for $3.99, but the listing got removed, so I don't know what to recommend to you guys. Maybe later I'll find, something comparable, maybe even better. Oh, and now I'm trying to cut the shapes out of the clay, but my fingers are too fat to push them out of these little circles. So I just use my mind, and I figure out that I could just use a paintbrush to push them through. And that was another lesson, use your tools to your best of your ability, and I don't know, use your mind, I don't know. So I'm just pressing into this hard behind clay, the shapes, the metal cutters, and it's going pretty well, but a lot of the shapes get stuck, and this is what we end up with. So pretty and not that great, but it looks nice. And this is what it looks like when it's dried. I mean, baked. Yeah, not dried, baked. So yeah, baked at 275 for about an hour. As you can see, the marbling was way too small, so it just looks like a bunch of spider webs. So next to attempt number 2. In attempt number 2, I used this Cernit translucent clay. I think it's a UK-based brand. I'm not for sure, but it was about 500 grams, and I think I spent like $20 for this package alone. But the clay is so soft and sticky even, but that's what we're going for, I guess. So I just peel away the thin packaging. The packaging is very thin, so I ended up putting it in a freezer bag. So I just cut off 2 or 3 large chunks. Kind of looks like very hard cheese. It kind of looks like cheese, and it feels like cheese, but it is most certainly not cheese. So yeah, try not to eat it or anything, because this is not cheese, it's clay. So you're just gonna chop that up like we did before. I ended up doing bigger chunks because that's what I learned from last time. Don't use teeny itty bitty chunks, because the marbling design, you're not going to be able to see it. So we're just using the same color as we used this before, that yellow and the very pretty light orange. I shouldn't have put so much paint on this, but that's what I did. So I'm just using that paintbrush to cover each little chroma clay with a very thin layer of paint. And I eventually just get in there with my fingers because it's acrylic paint and it's, easy to wash off. So I'm not scared of touching it. So after the yellow, I do the exact same thing with the orange clay, just making sure it's covered with my fingers. I also use my fingers to pull apart any clay that was stuck together from cutting it. And then I wash my hands and let it dry overnight. Some parts were still stuck together, but I don't think it matters that much. So now it's the next day, and I'm just using the same liquid Sculpey from before and putting a generous amount on top. And then I thought I was a genius because I got these pink gloves from the dollar store, and I thought it would be the perfect way to avoid getting gross sticky hands. And it's just a real pain to try to wash off. I just hate how it feels, so I'm gonna try to use gloves. So I just continue trying to mush up the clay with my dollar store pink gloves, which I think are cute. I love pink. But I noticed that it's really hard to get a proper grip on the clay. And then I noticed that it's leaving the little indentations on the clay, and I just can't have that. So I end up taking out the glove, and I didn't have any other gloves. So back to having sticky hands for me, I guess. But luckily, it doesn't take as long because this brand of clay is very soft. And boom, I upgrade to this big chunky roller I got from Michael's. I think it was like $8, and I think I even got to use a coupon with it. So then I just go to town. I do my best to try to roll this chunk of clay into as square as I can get it, and it's really not even that hard. Like, you can see that because of how soft the clay is and how big the roller is, it's pretty much instantly a big rectangle. The only downside is I noticed that the roller kinda pulled off some of the acrylic paint on the outside, but I don't think it actually matters. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take my clay blade and cut little chunks out of the little square cane I got going on. Once the cane is all cut up, I just sandwich it between two pieces of parchment paper. And then I use my big chunky new roller to roll that out and kind of make the surface kind of flat and make all the little chunks stick together. So at this point, the clay slab that I'm making is way too thick, and I'm too scared to use the pasta roller because it totally ate up and shredded the top of my other slab. So I just do my best to try to roll it as thin by hand with the big roller as I can. Eventually I just give up and I start cutting shapes out of the clay slab. And that was bad because my earrings ended up really bulky and chunky and just big earrings, and that was not good. But you know what? It's okay because cutting the shapes out of the clay slab is kind of really fun. And the only downside is because the clay slab is so thick, they just keep getting stuck in the cutter, and then I have to push them out, and then I leave these finger marks and these dents. So that's another con to having a slab that's way too thick. But luckily I figured out I could gently kind of lightly tap it out of the clay cutter with my paintbrush. But that was just extra work that was unnecessary. So this is what we have left after cutting out all the shapes. So now I bake these. I think I bake them at 270 for about an hour. And luckily nothing burned, but they're just so chunky. I don't really like how they look. I do like how the marbling looks, but it's just so thick. Like you can see up close. It kind of looks good, but it looks really bad. More bad than good. So now we're on attempt number 3, and for this attempt I used the same clay as before, the Cernit clay. So here I'm going to use my tissue blade to just cut off 2 little chunks here. And this is all the clay we're going to use, 2 very sticky, fresh little clumps. And now, because of my previous attempts, I learned how important conditioning the clay is before. So I popped out my pasta roller and I'm just rolling it over and over on the lowest setting. But I've noticed that some of the clay from my previous attempts is sticking, but that's okay. I just basically mix it in by rolling it in the pasta roller over and over. So as you can see, I take a long time to roll out the clay. I'm just trying to make sure there's no air bubbles, and then I have a nice, thin, even thinness piece of clay. Now that my chunk of clay is nice and conditioned, I just take my large roller to roll it out, unstick it from the parchment paper, and then just cut it into those little chunks that I'm going to use to make the marbling effect. While I'm cutting the clay, I'm aware of how big the chunks I'm making are. I try to cut them in a nice sized chunks, nothing too small. Once I'm done cutting it up, I just unstick it from the parchment paper, and then I just really start pulling it apart. And again, Cernit clay is a really sticky sort of clay, so you really got to put in some work to separate the cut up pieces, even if they're completely cut. It's a little tedious, I'm not gonna lie, to have to pull apart all the cut pieces, but I think it's worth it because Cernit is known for being a really nice translucent type of clay. So here it is, all the separated pieces. We're gonna take our Michaels brand Craft Smart acrylic paint, and we have it in yellow and red. I decided to switch it up this time, so I just got tired of the yellow and orange, and I felt like the colors were cursed at this point. So yeah, I needed a change of pace, so I'm just gonna squirt those colors a little bit on each side. Here is another mistake I made. I once again used way too much paint. I should have used less, or I should have spread it more with my fingers or let it dry more, because after I spread it all over the paint, like all over the clay, it just didn't dry right, and it ended up bleeding, which you're gonna see later when I cut the clay canes. So once I completely covered each one of the little clay crumbs, I let it dry for about 30 minutes, and then I picked them off the parchment paper so that the bottom side of the clay crumbs could dry. And I let that dry for about an hour, not that long, because I still got some bleeding, so however long I let it dry, it wasn't long enough. So like before, I just used my hands and some Sculpey liquid clay to make a little cube, and as you can see, the chunks are a lot bigger this time, but unfortunately I have some bleeding and it's smudging all over the place because guess what? I did not let the clay dry for long enough once I had the paint on it. So I noticed, and you'll notice too, that there were these little pockets of wet paint and they smeared when I used my blade to cut through them. And it's pretty much unavoidable. I don't know how to correct it other than I should have just let the little slices that I cut off dry for longer, but I didn't. So there's another mistake that I hope you learn to not make from me. So here's the point where I should have just let this dry for like an hour, maybe two, but I didn't. I immediately tried to roll it out and get it flat enough for me to pass through my pasta roller. Big mistake. As you can see, I'm just smearing paint all over the place, but I just keep going, and eventually I just cut this in half and try to pass it through my pasta roller, because at this point I think I finally got it thin enough for it to not rip up and shred in the pasta roller. And on the back, as you can see, is just a thin layer of transparent clay, nothing added to it. I just rolled it out. And so the smearing gets even worse. Like, because of the pasta roller, the smearing just is everywhere now, and that is my bad. I was impatient, and I even just continued to use the pasta roller and smear the other half I had left, instead of waiting like a normal sane person. So yeah, don't be like me unless you like how it looks smeared. I do not. So it was a con in my case. So yeah, be patient, let your paint dry, and when you think it's dry, let it dry some more, unless you want this to happen. So now I'm just arranging the rolled out clay onto my ceramic tiles, and that's what I use to bake it in the oven. And I just go to work. I take my shapes, some circles, some hexagons, whatever I feel like picking up at the time. I use that and I press it onto the clay, and it's a lot easier than the other attempts because the clay is rolled out so thin this time. It's easy to kind of peel out the excess. But another lesson I learned, don't stamp your earring shapes so close to each other or it'll be a nightmare to peel off, especially when you use these shapes. They're so tiny. I got them from Michael's for like, I don't know, $5. I think it was actually on clearance. So yeah, here's where I spend forever trying not to distort the shapes of the earrings, but like having to carefully peel away the excess clay. I even have to use my tissue blade at one point because the excess clay is just so close to each other. Like, I really tried to get my money's worth, and ta-da, this is what we have left. It looks really bad. It is full of smearing because I am super impatient. Please do not be like me. So I just take the excess clay. I don't really want to waste it, so I just put it in a sandwich bag, and I'm gonna find a way to use it later. So this is after baking it in a mini toaster oven at 220 degrees to 230 degrees for about an hour. This is what it looks like in the sunlight. It's full of cracks and smears because of the paint thing. And what you're gonna see now is the only actual pair of earrings that I finished, because I put UV resin on them and I put the earring posts on them, but they were the only ones that weren't terribly smeared. However, the rest look like this, and they just look really bad, and I really didn't want to waste my expensive UV resin on all of them, so I only did one little test diamond that you just saw. I did a few more after that because I was curious on what it would look like with the resin. I did not like what it looked like, so I didn't do any more. But anyways, thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you learned just as much as I did, and wish me luck for the next time. Bye bye.